Alrighty. So I think we are looking good. Welcome to Full Circle. I'm your host, Chad. Sorry I'm a couple minutes late. Had a delivery snafu. Sorry, I'm also a few new settings, so hopefully I look okay. Obviously I'm sitting, got a new desk, nice chair. Managed to mostly make my green screen work, so we're back with that, which I like. Yeah, and here we are. So, real quick news announcements. Not a whole lot has changed as far as I can tell, except today the Trollbloods CID updates, the non-Northkin ones, or the non-new release Northkin ones, have dropped, and you know, nothing in that particular CID is particularly interesting for Circle. I think out of that, though, probably if you have not been seeing trolls locally or have been having easy time playing against trolls locally, that you may want to take note of the fact that I think some troll play is probably going to come back, and some of it could be problematic for Circle. We'll see. I'm not going to go full in depth on that, but basically you generally against trolls, depending on the specific build, but like as a general rule of thumb, against trolls you're going to want to have access to armor options, specifically that what do I want to say? Specifically, armor options that are not primal, or if they are primal, not on heavies, because they can get pretty high armor values for like infantry, which you like warders can get up to be pretty high, for example, but also the beasts can get pretty high, so you need sort of an all-encompassing armor solution. And then if you have spot removal for the Crystone, that's always good, because again that will help you. I mean, that's sort of their native way of getting armor, right? So if you can deal with Crystone, Grievous Wounds is pretty good there. Yeah, it's going to be tough. Grievous Wounds will at least turn it off for a turn. If you can RFP the leader of the stone unit, then the stone is gone for the game. Same as like Ghost Fleet and stuff. So unit leaders do not return if they are RFP'd. They don't promote. You choose another leader, and that model's gone. So, and the other thing you're going to want to, like oddly enough, want to pack against Trollbloods is stuff that can handle higher defense. I think Madrak 1's +2 defense and champions getting some love in the CID means you're going to see stuff like defense 16 champions in melee. So, just something to keep in mind, I would say. Okay, so this week I put the post kind of early to get a sense for what what kind of questions folks might be interested in, or discussions folks might be interested in talking about, and I kind of got I'm just sort of double checking, but I kind of got some similar themes, talking about pairings, again bringing up minions for the theme forces. So I'm actually going to start by pairings was the first question, but I also think it's the more interesting of the two. So I've talked about a lot of minions and mercs to include. We'll sort of touch some more on that, I think. Sorry about that. But what I want to do is talk a little bit more about pairing first. So I'm just going to assume for the time being that we're talking about 2 list events. The 3 list events have really dropped off. I don't know that means they're gone, but I haven't seen event postings for a little while that are 2 list events. So, or sorry, 3 list events. So I'm going to focus on 2 list events. So when we're talking 2 lists, there's also two different formats worth discussing. There's like the Masters standard style format, and then there's also the champions format. So I'm going to focus for the time being on the regular format. We may touch briefly on the the champions format through the discussion though. So there's a lot of with any of the factions in War Machine, there starts to be a lot of sort of, I'm going to call it groupthink on like what the quote unquote best tournament lists are in any faction. And as factions sort of drift to the top of the meta, that seems like socially anyways to be answered more and more for each faction, at least one or two of the lists. So you'll note, like right now in Crix, if you ask anybody, they're going to say that, well, the strongest pairing is obviously Ghost Fleet and Coven Dark Host. I don't play Crix enough, or really at all. I mean, I'm familiar with Crix, and I do own some, but like I don't really play them enough to really say that that is or is not true. But I suspect that there are variations in list pairing there that may bring a different advantage that those don't have. You saw it with Signar, right? There was a lot of Haley 2 plus as the, like, you absolutely must pair this. Khador's throughout times, early Mark II, for example, Khador was sort of like Sorcerer 2 absolutely is in your list pair, and so forth. So stuff like that happens. So in Circle, it's as you sort of gravitate down from like those top, like what everybody thinks of as the top. Not necessarily what is the top, but like what the perception of the top is. And as it filters down, the like what to play sometimes gets a little more gray as well, because people feel like they're not seeing as much success as some of those top lists. They don't, if they were sort of had that defined pairing, they would be the top. Again, I don't know, like that's sort of a socialized thing. It's just a pattern I've observed. For Circle, right now, I would say if you ask people, they're going to tell you Wormwood is still our strongest warlock. And then you're probably going to hear some discussion around somebody like Unatu. Just if for no other reason than off the backs of WTC and the Theme Force drop, that those are the two most, they were the two most seen casters. And then you may hear some other folks. Baldur 2 has been pretty popular for a long while, so you may hear him pop into the discussion there. But that's really what the discussion's been around. And so when you're the person who posted the question actually, when they posted it, said like, I haven't really practiced with Wormwood. What are the question sort of phrased in like, well, what are my options for list pairs? And with this theme drop, I kind of feel like there are a significant number of options, and I think that is both because of the themes Circle got and because of the themes everybody else got. So right now, for example, and Steamroller 2017. So right now, I think infantry, for example, is sort of all over the place. And so this sort of notion that a year ago that we were playing like, cheap Warjack spam machine and armor machine and things like that is not gone, but diminished. And, just the mere presence of Crix being sort of a top contender will cause that to happen right now. And also you just need to evaluate like when we say armor, like where are the things you're concerned with. So just to throw those out there real quick, in my opinion, it's Protectorate with Amon and Raza specifically. Like Severius 2 and a couple others can play a bunch of jacks, but he's the like most common culprit you're going to see for at least the time being. Obviously Khador, Karchev, Harkovich, and a few others. I mean, even to a degree, like a Vlad 1 running 5 jacks and like 5 units of Winter Guard is something you want to be concerned with. And then like the old like Arcane Shielded Stormwall, armor buffed Colossal is still going to be out there a little bit, but I'm seeing less and less of that. Signar has a significant number of lists with a lot of jacks, but they don't like in Signar the armor is generally not that high unless it's the thing with Arcane Shield on it. Just something to consider. So, Trollbloods and Scorn are sort of on the rise, but I don't know that I've seen like Scorn's playing more infantry than they are beasts right now. Trollbloods, we'll see. I kind of see them having some lists that can play beasts and some that play infantry. I also see light beasts sort of have been more popular, probably because they're less points. They can hopefully they're more flexible in that way. It's another you get additional models. If you can like buff their damage up to deal with heavies, then you certainly can deal with lights, and you can deal with infantry a lot of times a little easier, etc., etc. So, and then there's lots of infantry, and there's lots of different types of infantry. Like what you need to answer, like Trollkin champions versus like Iron Fang pikemen versus, trying to think of the good like Nis swordsmen versus blood trackers versus etc. etc. Like Protectorate and Khador infantry, Banes, cavalry. Like what you need to answer these things is going to vary a lot. And so when you're looking at your list, there's a few different ways you can go. You can always try to present a puzzle to your opponent that they have to unravel. And Circle has a few lists that are able to do that. The primary one that comes to mind is going to be Baldur 2. You're going to bring a Bones of Orboros list with him. It's going to have a Roots of Earth Woldrath in it probably, and then some other Wolds. And basically it's going to be like, can you deal with all of this armor 23? Hard to cast, you can't cast spells on the Woldrath. You're not easily going to get it out of a zone, but it also isn't going to hit very, super hard. It's going to try to out tank you. Can your list deal with it? Like that's a question we can ask. But for the most part, I see Circle as a faction that we kind of ask questions, but we're also answering them at the same time. Or the question we're asking is like, are you going to be able to keep yourself from losing on scenario to us while keeping yourself safe from assassination, depending on the list? And so I think that's a more pertinent question for Circle. And it's by saying that you're really sort of answering things, right? Like, how do I go in the zone, etc. And all this is kind of a leading, I can't find the word I was looking for, leading into how do you do your pairing? Well, in my opinion, the first thing you're going to want to take into account is Steamroller 2017. I think, in general, you want to look at your list being able to deal with sort of everything. You need to be okay in scenario. You need to be able to score zones. You need to be able to clear zones. You need to be able to deal with infantry. You need to be able to deal with some amount of hard targets. And I'm personally kind of leaning towards you want a balanced list that sort of skews lightly in a direction, more so than you want something that is super skewed. I'm not saying you can't play something super skewed, but I think you want something that is lightly skewed. So when we're looking at that what that means to me is you're probably gonna want one list that does have some answers to armor. You're gonna need some accuracy in there, and you're probably gonna still need to be concerned with other lists that can get the alpha on you, lists that are pretty tanky, and lists that have a lot of guns. Now that last thing is a little bit diminished with Steamroller 2017, and I think a lot of it is going to be trying to play around it. But let's talk about what are some things you can kind of pair up. So I think most of our stable of casters is viable in a 2-list pair. They aren't all, I would not say all of them are the focal point you want to play around. And as far as questions that you kind of need to be able to answer, I sort of look at, can your list, between your 2 lists, you need to be able to deal with Khador, Crix, and probably Legion. I think if you look at sort of the common lists being played by all of them, you'll probably catch everything else in the middle. I use Legion specifically because of Fianna. So if you can moderately deal with high defense, high armor, a lot of guns potentially behind the high armor, and just in general a lot of infantry, you should have your pairing kind of figured out. But also for instance, I think if you could look at playing like Kruger 1 and Devourer's Host, right? So the list I've talked about on the channel several times. And I think that list is still very good and very, very relevant. I think there's other versions of Devourer's Host that are good as well, but the Kruger list specifically is going to be strong into shooting because of Gale Winds. It's strong against Cloud Walls, similar, same for the same reason. And it's going to be pretty strong into infantry between his feet, his gun, his lightning tendril spell, and the fact that you're bringing Death Wolves, Ravagers, and so forth means you probably should be pretty okay into guns and infantry. What he's not going to do is crack a lot of armor, right? He's not a list. You're gonna you can drop him into some troll infantry lists. You're probably not going to want to play it into something like that Champion's Brick I mentioned, because I just don't know if you're going to quite crack the armor you want. It's probably playable. You're not going to want to play it into a lot of a lot of heavies in like a Trolls list or a Scorn list, because they're gonna, between like Cray Bubbles and those Creel Sound, etc., they're gonna be able to stack things up pretty high. Not Cray Bubble, sorry, Agonizer in this case. Yeah, so now if you're playing Kruger 1, you're like, okay, well, and he's also not. He's actually great into some Khador lists, but if one of their lists is like pretty much when you pass the threshold of like more than 4 Khador jacks, you're probably going to need something a little bit more flexible or a little bit more armor cracking. So for that, if you're going to go with Kruger 1, now I would suggest you want to start looking at things that deal with armor as your list to go with him. And with that, you're going to want to go with, I would start looking at Chromac 2, Kaya 3, Kaya 2, Untu, and then there are some other approaches. Mosar can be played in a way to handle armor because he has Curse of Shadows and the ability generally to put himself where he needs to utilize that. Wormwood has Curse of Shadows as well. Baldur 1 potentially, again, depends on your build, but Stone Skin can help you kind of get over that hump. Tanith has Scything Touch, and Affliction also can deal with armor in a very in a different way. Like Reeves with Affliction can do a lot of damage. Or you can also potentially sort of aim for control. So like a Kruger 2 with TK, you can get the right TK. Oh, Bradigus. Bradigus post CID is the other one in that list. Kruger 2 with TKs, a lot of times you can get, if you can, now you're going to have to play a lot of games with them to sort of know which thing to do when, but he can do a, putting in TK in the right place to turn something around so he can't charge you, and then being far enough away, especially Khador heavy, it's only speed 4 usually. But, there are still things to watch out for, like Harkovich has Jumpstart. You're going to have a harder time with that. So there's a lot of different ways, and you're going to need to play that matchup. It's generally not an easy one for Circle. So if you can, practice your list against that. But right now, I think a lot of things are valid options to pair up. Just you want to be careful not, in my opinion, you want to be careful not to cause yourself a list chicken, or minimize the amount of list chicken conundrums you're going to cause yourself. And you want to make sure you're covering as much as you can of the game without compromising so much that you're to cover something you're going to lose more than you're gaining in your coverage. So I think, that said, I think right now, most of our stable, I think, is fine. I think Kaya 1 you're going to struggle a little bit with. If you're going to play her, I would definitely recommend getting a lot of reps in, having a very specific game plan. But also, like I said, look at what you're pairing together. Like, I think you could play Kruger 2 and Bradigus post CID, for example. You can even play them both in the Bones theme because they're going to play very differently, potentially. You can pair like an Una 2 with a Chromac 1 possibly, if you want to go a little more beast heavy in both lists. And also start looking at the theme lists, right? So we have 5 theme lists now, theme forces. And they all sort of bring a unique different approach, and don't feel like you necessarily need to play two different themes. I don't think you do. Don't necessarily feel like you shouldn't play two different themes. I don't think we have one theme that is definitively the strongest. I think you may see a lot of folks suggest that it's the Call of the Wild, the Living Beasts, but I think that's just a tool to the correct thing. And one of the things that list will struggle with is scenario, because you're only going to really consistently with many of our warcasters or warlocks, you're only going to have access to 2 solos, probably 2 blackclads, and 2 units, probably the 2 shifting stones units. So you may get one more solo in there, one more small unit like swamp covers, but mostly that's going to be about it. So keep that in mind, right? How is this list handling scenario? If you, one of the reasons why I would have to go back to thinking about Kaya 2 and how I would play her is because she has a tendency to want to play like 4-5 really high value heavies that are good targets for things like Force Evolution. They can stay safe from her feet and Shadow Pack, and they can hit very hard twice because of her feet. But they also don't generally want to stand around in zones, because if they do, they're going to be dead. And if you lose your 21-point Getorix and don't get enough work out of him, you're in trouble. Just as an example. So if you're going to play something like a Kaiju, you need to realize that and look at your list and how it's playing and how it can answer. The other thing is with List Chicken, and this is another reason I shied away from Kaiju at the time. I think it can be rethought of how to approach her, but the reason I shied away was I felt like I had her and Kruger 1 paired up, and I felt like I was constantly in a situation where they had one list I definitely want to play Kruger 1 into, and they had one list that I definitely needed to play Kaya 2 into. And now I'm trying to get in their head to see like which one are they going to pick. And if I'm wrong, it's going to be a real awkward matchup unless I get a pretty unique strategy and some things go my way. So that was why I shied away from the build I was playing with her at the time, because I felt like that was the case. Now, I could have probably continued to pair her if instead of Kruger 1, I had something more like Tanith maybe as my not a good range answer. Wormwood, maybe. It was like Wormwood and Kai too. Maybe that would have worked, because now maybe I'm still playing that Devourer's Host list, but it's backed up by something that can deal with some amount of armor or can out control it. You can go the route where you're playing List Chicken, but that is the risk that you're putting in there. So now when I look at lists, I'm like, okay, well, if I know that I'm pretty sure I want to play blank into Khador, well, what lists is Khador going to present me with? They may present me with all the heavy Warjacks. They may present me with all the Winter Guard. They may present me with some mix of those two. They may also go the Iron Fang Pikeman route, and now they've got a couple other themes. So what do I do into those? And if the answer is like, well, I need list 1 to play into options A and B, and I need list 2 for everything else, you better hope that you are picking correctly what to drop, or try to fill those gaps by being like, okay, well, this one list isn't the best at any of those, but it has a game into all of them, and then play the matchups if you can to learn how to do it. So again, things to pair. I also think right now you really need to make sure that whatever you're bringing, you can play into, at least for the short term. You need to be able to play in the Coven and Denegra 1. I don't see them slowing down in the amount they're played, because unless there's a nerf to Denegra 1 or some other nerf to Crix, I see them only increasing in the number of people playing them. Circle has a lot of options into them, but make sure, one of the reasons I think that people did so poorly at WTC into them was they were not prepared for both lists. They were prepared for the Ghost Fleet matchup, and then the Crix player is like, okay. And usually when they prepared for the Ghost Fleet matchup, they did so with a bunch of guns, and then the Crix player just windmill slammed their Coven list down, and those guns were pretty much useless the whole game. either Dark Host or Infernal Machines. I saw both, and I think both had perfect game into doing what I just described. So your list pair also needs to handle that. So if you're playing into Crix, you need to feel like you can play into Dark Host. Basically, any of the common Coven drops. You may see some other casters with it, but I think those are the two. Make sure you have magic weapons. Make sure, if you can, you have RFP or a lot of infantry removal, and make sure that you know, because you need to be able to kill like a Wraith Engine probably, pistol rates, things like that. So with that in mind, like what are some things that can be paired? I mean, I think you can go with Una as one of your primary lists, and then back that up, depending on how you build her, with more range support. You could build her in a more generalist list too, and bring like a Chromac 2 with her for more armor cracking. I think to play into Crix, you could do any number of our casters. I think theoretically Kruger 2, Kruger 1, Morvana 1. I had another one in there, just lost it. I think Mosar can be built for that. I think, let's see, I said Morvana 1, Mosar, both Krugers. Chromac 1, that was the one I was originally thinking, I skipped it. Chromac 1, I think a lot of people have really they've been real down on him because they think he gets shot off the table. I haven't played him in a while, and I certainly haven't played him into a lot of guns, but I think the thing with Ghost Fleet is, in Crix in general, is they still need to throw spells out there at you, and if you can turn them off with Bestial, you're going to have a good time. So, but like I said, I have not personally been playing that, so I don't want to speak terribly to it, just because you know, experiences may vary. I think the new theme force is a big boon to him though, because he didn't really want to play in any of the other themes. I know some people had some weird bones lists with him that I saw, and I also know that I saw some a few people playing in the Wild Hunt with him. I think those, I don't really like the bones list personally, but you know, if it's working for you, keep doing it. The Wild Hunt thing seems okay. I don't know that it really builds his game plan. He wants to play beasts, and the only real downside is I would love to be able to get a unit of Swamp Gobbers in there without him having to sacrifice a free solo to do it. But he only has 26 War Beast points for whatever reason, so that doesn't work. But you may still want to do that. It may still be worth cutting it below the 4 free models to get that extra cloud to keep him safe. But in addition, I think the Call of the Wild theme is a big boon to Chromac. And then just since we're talking about him, into Crix, the one big thing you want to remember is you probably need to feat possibly turn 1 to be able to put your upkeeps out and cast Bestial. That's a big deal. Also, don't be locked into thinking that, you know, a theme is necessarily bad. Try it. I think Morvana 1 in the list that Pagani posted, for example, is actually very potentially very good. I have not gotten a chance to give it a test run, and I do think it requires the CAD changes, primarily because you need the +2 strength for the 2 wardens he had in the list. But once you've got that there, I think that I think that list has a lot of potential to really grind out an opponent where you, in a way you wouldn't imagine. But, you know, you're still not going to have an answer to heavy armor. So if you play Morvana, you would not want to pair that Morvana 1 list with the Chromac 1 list that I was just sort of intimating might exist. Because you're not going to be able to answer one of the questions, which is armor. Right? Chromac 1 brings enough beasts, he can do enough to armor, but he's still going to be limited in that way. You also do always have the assassinations. So somebody like a Chromac 1, a Kruger 2, a few others, those two are the most prominent in my opinion, Una 2 maybe, are always going to have some interesting assassination vectors. Kaya 3 is another interesting one as well. I like her a lot, and you might be like, oh, well, I want to crack armor, so I'm going to bring a bunch of lights that can trade up, or I'm going to bring things that hit really hard. Like it's really tempting to bring a lot of like maybe Rip Horns, Gnarl Horns, maybe even just Griffins, or bring like ferals and purebloods. Purebloods are okay for this purpose, but I think you really want to bring Warpwolf Stalkers with her, and the reason for that is that in a pinch, you can now start using Stalkers to kill off infantry and then sprint away, especially for free. You want to be thinking about things like that with your list. So I think you're probably going to want one of Kaya 3, Kaya 2, Una 2, Chromac 2, and depending on build, arguably Baldur 1, Tanith, or Wormwood. I think one of those, or Mosar, one of the, I think you need to have one of our answers to higher armor, higher wounds in your pairing. So any of those, like 8, I don't think I'm missing anybody. Or Bradigus, I keep doing that. Bradigus post CID. Any of those I think are going to be a good option into armor. And then I think what you pair with them is something that in general is better into more infantry, more cricks, and also something that's better in scenario, because the more varied things you can bring, the better it is. So you might be able to do one of those lists and still be in that range. Like I think Una 2 can do that. I think Baldur 1 can do that. I think Wormwood or Mosar can do that. And then you're going to want to look at, okay, well, look at the nuances as well, but look at, okay, what am I going to pair with this? Like, what am I really weak to with that list that I need to make sure I've covered? Like, where's my Crix matchup, right? Because a lot of those casters I just mentioned, they're not really going to be your Crix answer, right? You're going to have a hard time stopping debuffs, possibly. And Wormwood or Mosar could be. They have a lot of RFP. Una 2 possibly could be. Again, it can be done, but really look at that and see like, okay, well, how do I feel about them into Crix? How do I feel about them into guns? Am I okay? Am I not okay? And then your other list, I think, can consist of things like you potentially could pair 2 of them up, but you're going to be playing it differently. Like, I think I would play like an Una 2. What's the name of that theme? Secret Masters, possibly as a more infantry focused drop into, and then pair it with like a Kaya 3. You might be able to do something like that and still cover all your bases. You can also do things that most people think are blasphemous, like playing a bunch of Rotterhorn Griffins instead of Scarsfell's Griffins, or some number of them. I would still have some Scarsfells. But by and large, I would start looking for your other list. I think you're looking at things like Wormwood, possibly Mosar, depending on how ranged protected you feel like your first category is. Morvana 1, Kruger 1, Kruger 2, Chromac 1, I think I said Wormwood. I also think I'm missing somebody in my thoughts. Baldur 2, I would put in this category as well. He's sort of an interesting one, but I think because really he's armor and not dealing a lot of damage, like he could be your off list of that. And he's sort of asking that question then too. Can you deal with this? And usually infantry can't. As long as he doesn't lose on scenario. So that's sort of where I would be looking for your list pairs. Something along those lines. Like I said, I'm probably missing some. There might be something out there with Morvana 2. I don't know. And a couple others. But by and large, that's kind of where I've been looking. So take that for what it's worth. I don't think, the one point I do want to make sure that I make is that I don't think you have to have Wormwood. I don't think you have to have Una 2. I don't think you have to have Baldur 2. And I don't think you have to have Kruger 2. I think there's plenty of viable builds in there. And then obviously after that, you need to get reps in with it. If you can, get as many reps in with it as you can. Think about how it's going to do into odd situations. Sometimes look for things that you like, weird alternative ways to approach a list, right? So let's say I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say you're playing Sorry, I'm trying to think of a good example. These come usually more when I'm playing. But let's say you're going to play Kaya 2, and I just mentioned she's got a hard time into scenario, right? And you have the list you have. Well, the right play may actually just be, I'm going to put Force Evolution and Spiny Growth up on Getorix, and he's going to stand here. And I'm going to, and I might be able to, he might die. I might lose 21 points, but if I don't put him here, I'm going to lose, right? Or using the terrain to do that. So I actually did have a game against, back at Adepticon with Kai 2, against Robin from Sweden, who was in town for the event. And we went, I think he ended up, we played 3 times. I think he got me twice. But we went 1-on-1 at Adepticon. And one of the things I was able to learn with my Kaya 2 list at the time was I could position my, and the scenario was a little different, so I didn't have to worry as much about it, but I could position my battle group in such a way that he could only get so many Griffins on each of my pieces, and I had Loki and Getorix at the time, and I could make their defense and armor make it very difficult to take one of them out, and of course I had the damage to Spiny Growth is pretty significant to Griffins. You want to look at stuff like that. Can I position it? Similarly, I'm going to use the Kai 2 example again. I played a game against a guy named Josh, who was a WTC player from Canada when I was at MuseCon. And one of the things there that I did was and he was sort of surprised, and he had been used to mannequins sort of being a detriment. And I had 2 mannequin units and a big battle group. And what I was able to do, what I saw that I needed to do in that game was use the terrain to my advantage, but also that Kaya needed to do a lot of work. And Kaya was pretty consistently going in on things. And with flank and her focus stack, she was putting out, getting a charge and then a couple extra boosted attacks or whatever she needed to soften up some jacks so that I could kill them. And eventually spiral enough of the game in my favor and keep my Sentry Stones wide so that I could continue to make that look good. Another game against Amon, different player, where the list chicken problem that I talked about came up. I thought he was going to drop Kree S3. I had Kaya 2 and Kruger 1 in this event as well. I thought he was going to drop his Kree S3 list, which had a bunch of cavalry in it. And generally speaking, your beast heavy list does not want to deal with a cavalry heavy list. So I thought he was going to play that because it looked ideal into what I had. So I picked Kruger 1, but he dropped Amon and Roslin. My Kruger 1 list has a Getorix that cracks armor, so I was a little bit concerned. However, what I did there was I tried my best, I sort of tried to delay him as much as I could with my infantry and then looked for an out because Mon has to come forward. And I got it in the form of, and he also made a little bit of a mistake by putting his Templar right in front of Amon, thinking it couldn't be pushed or slammed. Because of Fortify, however, it can be thrown, and Kruger has a throw spell. So knowing those little things, or sometimes you want to look at the situation and go, what is the thing I most need to do? Try to take advantage of those. So, and by that, I think you want to look to make sure your list has the flexibility to do some of those things so that you can take advantage of them when the time is right. Windwall on Una 2 doesn't seem like it's the best spell all the time to cast. It costs 3, she has to cast it every turn. It's only going to keep so much safe if they have magic guns, etc., etc., etc. But if you can put a bunch of things in it and advance up the table. So one of the very first games I ever played with her, and she didn't have the nerf yet or anything, was against Ossian at War Machine Weekend a year ago when she was released. And what I correctly guessed was it's an Ossian player. This was when he still had Deadeye for some reason. It's an Ossian player. He's gonna just move up, and he's. I had Rotterhorns and I had 10 Griffins in there. I had whatever I owned basically. It was pair of Rotterhorns, pair of Razor Wings, and 6 Scarsfells or something like that. I don't remember. Some number, maybe it was 9. Maybe I had 3 Razor Wings. I don't know, but you get the idea. And so what I did was I didn't cast anything except Windwall. I camped 4, I moved up with Windwall. Camped 4, moved up with Windwall. And eventually he decided, well, I'm going to feat and I'm going to try to kill you. But she's like defense. Oh, and I think it was behind Century Stones. She's like defense 15 and can only be targeted by magic weapons. And he did actually have Aeana, which was rare at the time. So like one unit could shoot at her. But even with, and you know, he wasn't able to get like everybody in range. So he had like 7 or 8 shots with Deadeye. I have 4 transfers and like they're POW 10s. So even with the additional die, like it, but. And I might have lost, right? He could have had really hot dice and I lose. But then because of him doing that, he makes Ossian susceptible to a counter check. And that's not normally how I would approach an Una game. Because it doesn't really make sense to her game plan. But that time that's what I did. Because it's what I need to do. So you need to know when to vary up how you're playing. And I think in CID, I think I saw Pagani say this, or maybe it was somebody else, but one of the strengths of this game is having a bunch of choices and deciding which one is the appropriate for any time. So just because you see like some casters that have 2 upkeeps or some stuff that you're like, when am I ever going to cast this? I guarantee you there's going to be some time it's the right thing to cast. Maybe super, super rare, may not be as rare as you think. So watch for that type stuff with your list. And I think looking for those type of things is also important to being able to not lose list chicken, right? So I have a few Una lists I've been playing, but for me, for Una 2, I was playing her with a Storm Raptor and 7 Griffins as opposed to the 12 Griffin list a lot of others are playing. And the thing with that is I have the gun of the Storm Raptor, which can do work against infantry and heavies, not to mention the Electro Leap. So if I do zig when I should have zagged in my list chicken situation, I at least still have the Storm Raptor, which can do okay into heavies. I do wish it was a little bit better, but it also has the gun that can kind of contribute throughout the game, and is a good target for Hand of Fate. Bradigus, for example, I played with some of the post-CID stuff, or the Christmas CID stuff, and one of the things that it can do is I had 6 Wold Whites, I think. They can light things on fire. So again, now we're doing work in infantry. One of the things that list is likely to have is a minimum of 3 Stone Shapers and probably also 2 Black Lead Wayfarers. So now you have these 5 models that generally what you want them to do is buff your Wold's damage, repair your Wolds if you need to, and throw Hunter's Marks out there so that you can get longer charges. However, that's 5 guys that have spray 8, POW 12. 5. If you have a Kruger 2 list, you're probably going to have the same, 4 or 5 of those guys. And if you have a Fulcrum, they're even better. They're even going to be more accurate at doing it. So now you've got these guys. They're going to be decently accurate. You can lay down these sprays, fire, throw some spells out. Now you got a super flexible list. Knowing what to do in the situation is always going to be very, very clutch. So that's just something you're going to want to keep taking into account. And then figuring out how to play, if you're going to play infantry, if you're going to play beast heavy, have answers to scenario and whatnot. If you're going to play infantry heavy, make sure you can stay alive in scenario and etc. So, didn't see any questions in the chat today, but the other thing, I'm not necessarily going to dig super duper deep into the Minions situation. I've talked about it on a couple of shows, so I'd say go back to my last couple. That said, I'll touch on it briefly, and then we're probably going to wrap this up. But as far as Minions, I kind of feel like don't go overboard. Don't try to don't include them when you don't need to. Don't feel like you need to include them if you don't. And have a specific reason for them. Because the thing is, you're always going to be sacrificing something probably to include one. Whether that is your battle group, because 3 of our 5 themes get additional points from non-battle groups. So if you are like, well, I got 60, I can afford a minion. Well, that's 5 points you're not putting in your battle group. Make sure that that's worth it. Or 5, however many points. So make sure that's worth it. Make sure they have a purpose. In the themes that are beast heavy, again, make sure it's worth it. Make sure it has purpose. But for those, maybe you do need like some of this is stuff that you're going to want to look at as you're playing. Am I struggling in scenario because I don't have a unit or enough units? Well, look into minions to see what's there, especially some of the smaller units. Swamp Gobbers are a great example. They cost 2 points, and one Gobber will score you a unit zone. The Croak Trappers, I think they're called, that are coming out. 2 guys, 5 points, single unit, and they have a knockdown. Range attack, it's like range 4. Stuff like that. Look for those type of units. The cheap ones that are smaller, Bone Grinders are another one that might be a good fit. Boilmaster. Again, specific reasons. So that's the thing that you'll put in like a Chromac 2 list. It's probably worth losing a free solo to add that because it's that good. It's probably that good for Chromac 2. Same with some of the Devour Souls lists for that model. Do you think having more threat range and a free charge is worthwhile? Lanissa is something you're going to want to look at. Do you want a piece that can operate on its own but also sort of contribute to your game plan? So like I really like the Totem Hunter with Tanith. So that's something you're going to want to look at. Are you playing Bones of Orboros and you just in Wormwood and you need souls, Bone Grinders, Brigands, stuff like that? Now you can put those in your list. Upkeep removal, Eilish, Throlg, both of those are absolutely ones to consider. There's a couple others. Do you need cheap shield guards, Bone Grinders, Shamblers? Are you already producing corpses that the Shamblers can pick up? Another reason, again, they might be good. Do you have something where it's really worth to play like Wrong Eye and Snapjaw, who cost quite a few points? But I do have a list that I theorize that I think somebody else has been trying, which is like Una with Griffins in Secret Masters. It's with Wrong Eye and Snapjaw are backing up the Griffins. So now you've got these defense 15 models that are in Starcrossed. Good luck. So that's an example of him being a perfectly good cornerstone piece. Some of these other ones are examples of answering a question you're having trouble with. Look into that. If you're playing into Denegar 1 a lot, Eilish is probably going to want to go in your list because if a unit has Crippling Grasp on it the whole game, it's going to pretty much do nothing. Lanissa can increase threat range in Wild Hunt and Devourer's Host, because you can't play a Wayfarer in those lists. I would not play her in the other list because you can take a Wayfarer. Also scenario, ambush things. Specifically, I think the Gatorman Husk is going to be interesting. I think Will talked about this when he was on the show, but I think the Bogchark Trawler is potentially interesting for being pretty disruptive in the back. Totem Hunter is not a ambush, but you can play like that. I think you could do like a min unit of Bogchark Ambushers, might be interesting. Hutchuck brings you some more armor cracking, and he's ambushed, so like look at some things like this, especially Hutchuck. He's interesting because you could choose to ambush him when it makes sense and not when you need him more like central to do his debuffing. So, anyways, like I said, I just sort of touched on minions there. I kind of went long-winded on my pairing ramblings, so I'm gonna kind of cut it short here, or well, cut it long here. Real quick, like to continue to thank Muse on Minis for allowing me to post the video on their website. It's fantastic they do that. I'm looking forward to seeing the guys at War Machine Weekend. Check out some of their products. They always have new stuff coming out, and it's always very high quality. And the guys are pretty nice. Even that Don Jamiris fella. And of course, Griffin's Roost Painting. You can check out her work at griffinsroostpainting.com and Griffin's Roost Painting on Facebook, where you can send a message if you're looking to get a quote on maybe getting some nice stuff painted. So that's going to be all for this week. Next week, I don't know. We'll definitely have a show next week. I do not guarantee. I may not have one on November 1st. That will be the day before I'll be heading out to War Machine Weekend. So we'll maybe talk pre-War Machine Weekend on the 25th. We may not have a show the following week. Hopefully, if you're going to be at War Machine Weekend, let me know. Love to chat circle. Hopefully I can play decently well in the last chance qualifier. So anyways, that's all for this week. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.